Again, the idea is to emphasize the difficulties of gaining a handle on decarbonization and meeting the temperature targets, and not just going on a polemic against the mainstream community that is trying to do so much to reduce our impact on climate and make it as equitable and as just as possible. There is an idea called carbon fractal, which we will get into, but I'll start with this map, which shows coal consumption in 2019, so by country and region. And surprisingly, US is quite red here, so high on the scale of coal users. It's in the third place after China, India, which obviously dominate. China is now a monster coal burner, and they still, I think, continue to build coal plants because they are investing very heavily, the largest in the world, into renewables, but they are also trying to stay on track with the high economic development paths, which requires lots of energy. So they will continue to burn coal till they have energy independence and enough from renewables and so on. Russia is there, and all these other countries, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and so on. And surprisingly, even some of the Middle Eastern countries, because obviously they don't have much of a hydroelectric, so they have to rely on solar, wind, and coal, of course. Okay, so this is leads us to the idea of a metaphor of carbon fractal. Conventionally, people think of ways to reduce emissions, which we have done already several times in this course and in my other courses on my channel. And the metaphor here is to use global commons like the atmosphere itself, the land, the oceans, glaciers are global commons to be protected, and so on. And then the goal is defined as production of public goods and distributions of emissions reductions. IPCC negotiations have come through this idea of differentiated responsibilities, so countries that have contributed more and are rich can take more responsibility for reducing emissions and so on. And then there is political response, which is about global collective action to produce multilateral treaties. Again, remembering that the idea of reducing emissions hasn't happened yet. We remain on a business as usual trajectory, even though there are tendencies at local scales like the UK, some European countries, and US showing some decrease in total emissions. Not anywhere close to what is needed for meeting the temperature targets like 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees by 2100. But nonetheless, there are indications, and now US has committed newly to reducing the emissions by 50% by 2030 compared to the 2005 level. Great idea, right? The proposed metaphor in this paper that I will show in the next slide, the link, is focused on decarbonization, arguing that emissions reductions are just not going to get it done, so we must focus on decarbonization. Then the metaphor becomes, instead of global commons, what is called global fractal. We will look at the properties of a fractal and why carbon usage is carbon consumption is basically a fractal. And the goal here is to disrupt carbon lock-in and catalyze the transformation at multiple levels. Okay, the goal is very simple: decarbonization, not percentage-wise reductions of emissions and so on, just decarbonize. Political response would be experimental, multi-level, multi-scale action to overcome the fractal carbon trap. So we are in a trap which is indicated by things like this. Even in 2019, even progressive countries like Germany, France, who are very far ahead, or even up here in Scandinavian countries, very far ahead in making investments in renewables, commitments to reducing emissions, to decarbonizing and so on, are still trapped into using coal to just make do in terms of energy requirements, right? So I may have missed a slide here, so I will stop and add it before continuing.